viewpoint that I bring to this issue reflects my history. For about 30 years, I was a service provider to corporations, and then for 4 years, I was here at TIAA-CREF looking at corporations from the viewpoint of shareholders. And I believe that my 4 years here at TIAA-CREF actually shaped my thinking more than the 30 years that I spent as a service provider. And I was also on the working group working under Bill Donaldson on this Committee for Economic Development issue that you're hearing about today. And my belief is that, based on these two careers, is that the shareholders and the corporations ultimately want the same thing, which is good economic performance. That belief is not one that is easy to implement in this country because we have a very long history of adversarial relationships between the corporation and a variety of its constituents. Shareholders for one, labor, and others, those who advocate the kinds of issues that are the subject of this report are viewed by many corporations as gadflies and as enemies. I agree with just about everything that Ben Heinemann just said to you, except that I would disagree with his view that there's too much emphasis on the board of directors. My belief is that what has been happening in the governance movement, which goes back really to 1985 with the founding of the Council of Institutional Investors and the creation of Institutional Shareholder Services and others, what has been happening in that period is really a redefinition of the role of the board of directors and a positioning of the board of directors so that it should ideally sit equidistant between the managers of the corporation, including the chief executive officer, and the other constituencies whose interests are tied up in that corporation. And from that sort of equidistant position, the board of directors is able to mediate between the often conflicting but equally valid demands of those groups. Executive compensation is one of those issues which we have all been hearing a lot about, in which the managers of the company are going to legitimately ask for high numbers. The shareholders are equally legitimately going to say, no, 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 not that much of our resources ought to be devoted to that purpose. And it's up to the directors to mediate and find the right answer. Neither side is going to be wholly satisfied, and that is probably where the right answer lies. This report, which I endorse 100%, I think is going to help us recognize some new thinking about the role of the corporation and the role of the board of directors. I'd like to go back to my undergraduate discipline. I was an English major in college, and just draw your attention to the title of this report. And there are multiple layers of meaning here. Look at the lead title, Rebuilding Corporate Leadership. There are really two messages there. One, I think the obvious primary message is the one that Bill Donaldson discussed, which is the leadership of the corporation in society and the leaders of corporations themselves individually taking statesman's and leadership roles on these issues. But it's also, there's a secondary message and a very important one about the leadership of the corporation itself. The role of the board of directors within the corporation and rebuilding the internal leadership of the corporation by more clearly defining what we want the CEOs to do and what we want the directors to do. And this report is extremely helpful in answering that question as well. directors, this is the second line of the title here. I would emphasize the word directors being in there. This is not companies, this is directors. How directors can link long-term performance. This is that goal that we all share. The corporation itself, its employees, its executives, whose compensation, as Ben correctly pointed out, should reflect their success. How we're going to link the long-term performance of these critical elements of social structure with the public goals, with the goals of the public that they serve. It is important to remember that the corporation is a legal creation of the state. The corporation exists because we have approved laws that have granted privileges to the corporation, limited liability, tax advantages. In exchange for that, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that there are fiduciary duties that the corporation owes back to the state that has created it and granted it special privileges. And in my view, there is nothing at all inconsistent with saying that a corporation must be focused on performance, on economic performance, but that it must also serve public goals. And I think it is absolutely the responsibility of the board of directors to do this. The chief executive officer must run the business, but it is the directors who must give the larger framework in which the CEO is going to do his or her job. And this report spells out with great clarity exactly how the directors ought to do that job. And if we can succeed in changing the thinking of boards of directors and CEOs as well, from the traditional adversarial view that our business has to be run and can be run best by us, operating free of outside influences because we know the bottom line and the top line. If we can change that thinking to a broader understanding that the corporation is an enterprise that exists because of privileges granted by the taxpayers and the country and the communities in which they exist, and that those obligations must be a part of the framework of the corporation, we will be able to achieve much greater success, both in bottom line performance and in solving these long-term problems.